So, now I'm delighted to introduce our first speaker for today's session. Please welcome Augusto Andrade, the CEO and co-founder of Skoog. He's here to shed light on Skoog's innovative platform, empowering landowners to tap into both carbon and forest products markets. Augusto, the floor is yours. Please go ahead.
All right, so our company is called Skoog. It's a wordplay with the word Skoog in Norwegian and most Scandinavian language, which means forest. I think very nice introduction by Ignacio. I think we're going to be touching on some of the points he mentioned here, especially from the beginning here, about the potential that forest and agriculture have to contribute to climate change. So perhaps contrary to popular belief, the potential on agriculture and forests to mitigate is actually bigger than the energy transition, because here with forests and agriculture, besides reductions, you also have the potential to actually capture carbon by changing agriculture practices, by changing the way forests are managed. So we see this as a huge potential. And then since we're talking about carbon credits, it can be a great source of generating carbon credits. The problem here, as also Ignacio mentioned, so he made a very good framing for us. There's a lot of problems both with quantity and quality. So this carbon markets have been around for around 25 years. And there's less than 500 projects or something around 500 projects in all this time. It's accelerating over the last couple of years because the demand has increased significantly. But now we are in a moment where we're talking more around quality, more and more around quality. So there's a lot of studies out there mentioning that, around 90% of those projects have one form or another of quality issues. So I would say right now, that's the biggest problem to scale those markets. So when we started the company, we actually investigated a lot the reasons for these problems. So talking, for example, on perhaps touching on quantity first, we look into the process, the way it's done today. It's very manual. It's very time consuming. It's very costly. So we see projects elaboration and registering of projects. It can cost up to 100,000, sometimes even more dollars. It can take up to 2 years from identifying, conceptualizing the project to issuing the credits. There's a lot of intermediate in the value chain. We're going to look into that in more detail in one of the next slides. So those are some of the reasons why supply has been a little bit constrained here. In terms of quality, we see problems like exaggerated claims about the impact of a project. Some of those projects don't have what they call additionality, which are things that would have been done anyway, like timber companies planting trees, eucalyptus plantations, and claiming carbon credits for that. So there's double counting is a problem in the infrastructure that's happening less and less, but it used to be a problem. So all those things have made the credibility of this market go down. And when we started investigating the way those carbon project developers operate, we realized they're very low tech. It's very hard to actually get down to the data they use to estimate and calculate the carbon sequestration, the carbon avoidance on their projects. And it's really hard to pinpoint where things went wrong, if it was a fault on the project concept, if it was something during the verification. Because project developers are really, in many cases, they just a company that has several contractors working in the value chain. So we can see here a little bit the simplified value chain. So you have a landowner and you have a project developer who approach them and conceptualize a project. As I mentioned, they work a lot with contractors along the entire cycle, both to make measurements, to develop documentation, to do the field work. And then once a project is conceptualized and you have a document, it goes to independent verifiers. It goes to the registry, such as Vera, Gold Standard. Oftentimes you have brokers and speculators on the commercial part. And then finally the end buyers. So the end buyer is really hard to understand what they're buying sometimes and where to go when, for example, one of the projects are on the media, for example, for bad reasons. And they try to understand where things went wrong. So we see an accountability problem here as well. So here this is an animation I'm going to skip, but we see how tech is entering here and it's doing really good things for this market. I even mentioned, I think, especially here around auditing, has been quite valuable because those companies are starting to rate those projects and separate the good from the not so good projects. We see more and more companies like Trimetrics, who's going to talk here after us, decreasing one of the problems Ignacio mentioned, the MRV, the monitoring, the verification and reporting. That's today very, very costly. So there's a lot of technology coming into reducing that. There are marketplaces helping on the commercial side of things. So, and there are companies here, very clever models building infrastructure for the carbon markets, but we don't see so many here on the early stage. We mentioned a couple here. This is not exhaustive by any means. And we see that this is where we need to see more and more companies, and we are seeing more and more companies, and we think it's going to be vital to unlock this market. You see here on the top, those are the ones we think that found a scalable, repeatable model of generating carbon credits. Nuri is a platform in the US. I think it's mostly with agriculture and carbon soil, similar to Carbon by Indigo. NCX is it's from forestry. So those are the models we admire, and that's kind of what we're trying to do here. So we're doing something that any landowner with a forest, with a farm, can enter those markets. So what we're trying to do essentially is make a more direct connect between the landowners and the buyers. We're going to be in the middle, intermediating everything and adding technology to speed things up and improve transparency, improve quality, and be a single point of accountability. We might not necessarily do the entire cycle, but we're going to be the custody. We're going to have the custody of the process from the beginning to the end. It's important to say here that the methodology, the way we see a bit different from those end-to-end platforms you mentioned, is not so much focused on a method, is more around the farm. So we will look at all the property. So we look into every case, what type of credit or credits can be generated. We're not targeting, we're not trying to generate too many types of credits. So we're working with partners for some of the things that require very specific knowledge about how to measure and monitor and report. For example, enhanced rock weathering, biodiversity is a new one, and biochar. So we're more looking to do perhaps this side of the equation here, the ones related to forestry and agriculture. But even that, we're looking to have partners in our platform who can be vetted, and just there's a few small companies we think we could help scale with technology that we're going to develop. So to give an example, and that became very clear with our first sign-up farmer, this farm has forests that can be preserved. Eventually, they are being more and more deforested to expand in this case is cattle, so to expand the pasture land here. So this person could receive payments to keep that forest. So he has a pasture land here that can be integrated with trees and create a silver pasture system here. And he also has some degraded pasture land that could be restored. Not to mention, this is there are companies generating carbon credits by spreading basaltic rocks into the soil, the process called enhanced rock weathering, and also biochar that needs to be included on as a substrate. So that could also be used. So just an example of how 5 different credits could potentially be generated if this person has access, and several companies work together in making the most, both financially and environmentally, out of this property. So the way we see this working is a landowner just simply sign up. We would group, certify, and issue the credits, monitor the areas, and we work also with the commercialization of the credits. So we have commercial partners. It's very important to have commercial partners because we need an estimate. We need them to commit to a certain volume and a certain price, so we can understand the return that the farmers will have. Because in some cases they will need to make an investment, and we would gonna need to make an investment in implementing, for example, an agroforestry system. So it's very important that we can have a price guarantee to avoid the problem that happened in some the cases that we studied. So just to give a bit more detail on the solution here. So the platform would allow people to identify their areas. So we have algorithms that can segment and calculate what type of credits can be generated and give them an estimate of financial benefits they would have in implementing those systems. And in the same platform, and that's very important, the project developer would be working into grouping and developing the whole documentation and monitoring of the project. One of the barriers we see here, and it's good that we're talking about carbon, but we're also talking about all the forest products here. Those methods or those type of forest products are very specific. So you need a lot of knowledge of every region to understand what type of species could go into an area. So we also developing this, what we call LURE, or Land Use Recommendation Engine, which is essentially using AI to read up on lots of scientific studies from every region where we operate and understand what species would work in a certain site, given properties such as, rainfall, average temperature, the type of vegetation. So we would be able to recommend the species in a case here, for example, some bare fruiting trees that can be integrated with agricultural pasture land. That's to maximize both the revenue, but also the environmental returns for each land. So that would give an estimate of cost and benefit, so the person can understand how much investment is needed, and also what would be the return in carbon sequestration or avoidance, and also the cost to implement the system. We're also working on a visualization of the final result here. And that goes back to the method, because for every method you have a number of trees you need to plant per hectare, the spacing between the trees, the orientation. So because we don't want knowledge to be a barrier, and it's a barrier because if people know what they're doing, they would have done it already. So we want to create those sort of digital guides for implementation using augmented reality. This is actually something that my co-founder Nima already developed and has already showcased. And it's very interesting because you can see with augmented reality based on the actual site what the system is going to look like. So the team is obviously to do this is a very multidisciplinary team. So we have people with background in consulting, in technology, data science. We have a GIS developer, we have agronomists and foresters. And for every project we develop, we also have specialists on the area, right? So we have a project in the Amazon, where we're working with Embrapa, which is a research institute, a couple of projects in the north of Minas Gerais, in the state in Brazil, where we have professors from local universities. And that's kind of key for us, right? To bring everybody into a common platform to scale those things and scale the knowledge. We're looking into other markets as well. We think there's a huge potential here, for example, in the Nordics, where there's a lot of forests that can be improved. There's a type of carbon credit called the improved forest management. So, but the principle is the same. It's just all about enabling anyone with land to be contributing to climate change by improving the way land is managed, and with more forest rather than less, and better managed forests. So we obviously won't do this alone. So we are raising a pre-seed round at the moment. We are looking for partners to be able to provide that commercial security to the landowners. So that would be off-takers. We're talking to a few companies, and also tech collaboration, because we are going to build a lot of since we're going to automate and digitize the entire cycle, but we are looking for smart solutions that we can integrate here, so we don't have to do some parts of the process.